My dad, Larry Linton, the only true servant leader willing to stand in the arena and fight for your freedoms.
Larry is a man of God, and he will move heaven and earth to protect the people in district.
Too many elected politicians act like chameleons.
My name's Mike. I'm Larry's neighbor. I bought the house behind him. I trust Larry to give me an honest answer.
And what's important to me is faith, family, and my freedom. And I believe these values are also held by Larry Linton.
More important than ever, I believe, in our lifetime to really stand up and fight for what's right. And Larry's doing that, and I'm supportive of it.
We need to replace career politicians in Nashville with leaders willing to stand for what is right, even if it's not popular. People who feel a calling and are not looking to make a profession out of it.
You're not going to find a more honest, straightforward, and passionate individual, I don't believe. Larry is what you see is what you get. He's honest.
Listen, if you are looking for a true conservative who's passionate about the state of Tennessee, the people that live in it, and wanting to make a difference in a meaningful way, Larry's your guy.
Well, good Monday morning, folks, and hopefully the day before the biggest middle finger from we the people is delivered to those that would love to see our constitutional republic destroyed forever. I've been out in the oil patch for the past week, out near Riverton and the Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming, working with the great teams out here. If you follow me on social media, you might have seen some of the winter weather pictures and videos that I have shared. Yep, so far, it has been mostly sub-freezing temperatures and a couple of days of snow. There was even some single-digit wind chill temperatures, which, let me tell you, I have not missed that at all. Now, I'll be here for the better part of this week before I make my way up to Baker, Montana for a few days and work with the teams up there. After that, I'll be headed over to Gillette, Wyoming for a few days before making my way back down here to Riverton, or I might even go head back up to Baker, it's depending on hotel availability. What a week it has been in politics, though, hasn't it? So much has been happening that it's hard to keep up with after I return to my hotel room from the field. But I'm doing my best. There are a few key moments that I want to cover, though, because I see them as setting up the American people to be sold what will be the second biggest lie told in human history. Now, you'll have to wait until the closing segment to find out what the biggest lie in human history was. But I'll give you a couple of clues as to what it was not. The 2020 election was not the biggest lie in human history, nor is that January 6, 2021 was an insurrection. Now, those do rank near the top of the scale of big lies, though. Nor is it the lie that our government performs its primary function of securing the people's liberty. That one's up there too, but it's not what I'm talking about this week. Oh, and I need to ask you loyal listeners to stock up on an item rarely thought about these days, except by preppers, that is. You all need to go out and get some matches, or maybe a lighter like this one. Why, may you ask? Well, it's to burn some bridges. I'll be burning some bridges with this episode, I'm sure, and mostly with some former shipmates, people that served alongside me and swore the same oath to the Constitution that I did. But that apparently doesn't matter to them in view of whatever special group they have allowed the communists in our government to pigeonhole them into. I am past the point of caring what they think about me or what their opinions are of me anymore. You know what they say about opinions, right? They're like belly buttons. Everybody has one, and they're completely useless. I know that in my life, I am only performing for an audience of one, he who created and sustains me. Burning bridges, the left's attempts at intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or IPB for short, prior to the election, all that and more on this week's episode of Liberty, Leadership, and Lies. So let's get on with this week's show and take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks. Welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Okay, folks, this will be a shorter show than last week's because I know that many of you, like myself, we're all gearing up for tomorrow's showdown. I'm debating on whether to go live on my Rumble channel, but there are many other great shows out there that will probably be doing the same, so I probably won't unless I notice that something that I think needs to be immediately discussed. I will most likely be watching Dan Bongino and his crew tomorrow night because he has a great lineup of guests or co-hosts. Dan will also be doing a mashup or what he's calling a crossover streaming event with Steven Crowder, which that should be interesting. I might even check in with a Timcast IRL show as he has stated that he too will be doing live coverage. It should be very interesting to follow those shows as well as checking in on some of the news coverage. Probably on Newsmax because that is the one that's available in my hotel room. I do have the advantage of being in the mountain time zone where the closing of the polls in the battleground states won't be too late to watch. I do still have a job to do, and it requires that I be out on location with these crews no later than 6:30 in the morning. And you add that to the 30 to 45-minute drive to get out to the location. And for those of you that know me, know that I believe that if you're not 15 minutes early, you're at least 30 minutes late to any scheduled meeting. Those 15 or so minutes before the morning meeting gives me a time to shoot the breeze with the guys before they get down to the business of the day. It helps to build that trust relationship that is so necessary to influencing the culture of the teams I engage with out here in the oil field. I mentioned a term earlier here in the introduction that many of you, especially those without a military background, may not be familiar with. Although it describes activities that we all do every day, I'm using the term in the context of this week's show to try to make it clear to the audience that the left is actually engaged in warfare against the citizens of this country. That term is intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or IPB for short. So what is it? Well, the following definition comes from a manual I studied and used while attending the U.S. Army Sergeant Major Academy. It's in use all throughout the military. IPB is the systematic process of analyzing the mission variables of enemy, terrain, weather, and civil considerations in an area of interest to determine what their effect will be on any planned operations. IPB allows leaders to take a holistic, that's one of those Kamilah's newest and favorite words to use over and over, but it's a holistic approach to analyzing the operational environment. I'll be discussing the current operational environment that commies are using this methodology for in a bit. But continuing, IPB is a holistic approach that, one, describes the totality of relevant aspects of the operational environment that may impact friendly, threat, or any neutral forces if there are any. The operational environment we are dealing with right now is tomorrow's election. But the environment was started through a combination of events, those being this administration's systematic destruction of institutions, as well as the economy of the republic, and combined with President Donald Trump's announcement that he would run for president once again. Everything you and I have heard, seen, or encountered since January 21st, 2021 is the operational environment for what I'll be talking about. This holistic approach, number two, accounts for all relative domains that may impact friendly and threat operations. Those domains, they include the media and messaging outlets, economic forces, international events and our country's connection to them, government's unconstitutional expansion of powers, and so on. Now, continuing this approach, number three identifies windows of opportunity to leverage friendly capabilities against threat forces. Now, what friendly forces would those be? Again, These forces would be comprised of a sycophantic media, global tech giants, commie judges, a weaponized legal system, and along with commie governors of blue states. And finally, number 4, the holistic approach allows the commie, tyrannical leaders of this administration, and by that I just don't mean sniffing Joe Biden and cackling Kamala Harris. They are just the outward faces of the true leaders of the communist movement. Now, it allows the tyrants working behind the curtain to leverage positions of relative advantage at a time and place most advantageous for the success of their mission. And their mission is to radically transform our constitutional republic. And they do it with the most accurate information available to them. Now, considering all that and how the operational environment has been shaped up until the point of the conclusion of the Republican Party's nomination convention, it was shaped by an unconstitutional appointment of Special Counsel Jack Smith and his 2 separate cases that were brought about to jail the only significant threat to the success of the commies' mission, the multiple civil trials in the People's Republic of New York, as well as the blue state government foot soldiers that tried to remove Donald Trump from the ballots in their states, and their failure to professionally, personally, and politically remove the threat to their tyranny that comes in the form of President Trump. That all led up to 2 attempts in a 60-day period to physically remove the threat to their power. And those are the assassination attempts on July 18th in Butler, Pennsylvania, and September 15th in West Palm Beach, Florida. The commies' efforts to completely control the operational environment by attempting to remove the biggest threat to their power through the various methods of prosecution, persecution, and even permanently removing, they all failed. Against the backdrop of all those attempts was now this is to them, the disconcerting fact that the threat to their complete control of the operational environment kept gaining in popularity, despite their attempts in the courtrooms, the court of public opinion, and encouraging the assassination attempts. What or where does that leave them now? Well, the method by which they gain control of the operational environment is rigging the election, of course. If you have been following the news since that September 15th attempt to permanently remove President Trump as their primary threat to retaining power, they have gone all in on the election itself, and mainly using their friendly and even some neutral forces. They're lackeys in the media twisting messages like Liz Cheney should be facing a firing squad, or President Trump wants to force women to do things whether they like it or not, has more to it than them trying to turn actual voter sympathy away from him and towards the just 5 months ago most unpopular vice president in the history of our nation. It's not just as simple as that, ladies and gentlemen, although that is what many people will only see. But you have to read between the lines. We also have to see the totality of the operational environment. And that means we must look at every event that has transpired since the day Donald Trump came down that escalator in 2015 and made his announcement that he would be running for president. The totality of everything the commies have thrown at Trump since that day, it has to serve to inform us when we see what has been happening from the day after the unsuccessful second attempt to permanently remove him from the battlefield, all the way up until tomorrow's election. Some of that also plays into my decision to burn bridges. Now, the momentum that President Trump has built, which some of these last-ditch efforts of labeling him as a fascist or the second coming of Hitler, and even the current resident-in-chief of the White House calling me and half of America garbage, has only hurt the commies more than they thought it would help. But there is something behind them doing it now that plays into their plans, even though they know it doesn't work outwardly. But the momentum President Trump has going into tomorrow, as well as the polling that has him in a better position right now than he was at this point during both the 2016 and 2020 elections, it will be the proof we need to expose what I believe is the planned second biggest lie in human history. So when I come back from this upcoming break, I will talk about some of the indicators that they have a plan in place. So stick with me. I'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're back. Now let's discuss some of the indicators that there is a plan in place to sell the second biggest lie in human history. First, a small piece of news that won't have much of an impact on the overall electoral college outcome, but is part of the plan to deny the people of this country our true choice for president. But first, let me say everything I will be discussing is what I think is about to happen. But there could be some mitigating factors that may prevent the commies from fully implementing their plan to sell the big lie. I, along with many others, are hoping that the mitigating factors stop the lie. Now, going back to the end of the last segment where I discussed the momentum and positive polling that currently surrounds the Trump campaign, it has led some people to believe that Donald Trump might even win the popular vote as well as the electoral college vote tomorrow night. Now, losing the electoral college will be devastating enough, but to lose the popular vote tomorrow, well, that is something the commies absolutely cannot tolerate. But it is shaping up to be a real possibility. That's why this bit of news is interesting and is probably happening everywhere, at least in blue states. Anyway, a woman that lives in Bellevue, which is in Washington State, that goes by the name of Jani Visaya. And for you fact checkers out there, this is an actual news report. Miss Visaya has now received 16 ballots at her home address, many with different names. Now, this is exactly what happened in the 2020 elections. Problems with mail-in ballots. Well, problems for Republicans, a bonus to the commies. Of course, reporting on events such as that type of story is usually what gets podcast, especially those on the constitutional or conservative side of the political spectrum. It gets reported by fact checkers and getting us banned or censored by what is supposed to be a neutral player on the battlefield, big tech. These fact checkers, really just opinion checkers, are just foot soldiers of the commies and are usually employed by what is supposed to be a free press. That is why one of our most ruthless enemies are not some dudes in the Middle East or in Asia with an AK or an RPG and wearing a ski mask. Our most ruthless enemy is some dude or chick in America with a liberal arts degree, an SSRI prescription, and enough free time to volunteer their services as a quote unquote fact checker. I mean, you really must consider how wild this election is by considering the opposing sides and their surrogates. On the side of President Trump is Elon Musk, the richest guy in the world, the entire UFC fighting roster, former chair of the DNC, Tulsi Gabbard, the 70-year-old and more physically fit than any liberal man and nephew of the former President JFK, who is also a member of one of the most prominent Democrat families, Bobby Kennedy Jr., all of them along with an army of men with normal testosterone levels. And more on that in a bit. On the side of Heels Up Harris and Tampon Tim Walz, well, there's Rachel Maddow's twin Mark Cuban, the Krasenstein brothers, dudes that are the prototypical examples of white dudes for Harris, and an army of sexually blackmailed celebrities and alcoholic liberal women with an SSRI prescription. Now, moving on, how about this other news report? And I actually saw the dash cam video of this. A news report that bags of ballots were found on the highway in Miami, Florida. So far, two areas of the country that lean heavily blue have some election integrity issues surrounding ballots during the early voting period. Nothing suspicious, right? But like I said earlier, these events won't have much of an impact on the electoral college, but could impact the total popular vote. Nobody's going to question a large or overwhelming vote count for Heels Up Harris in a predominantly blue city or county, right? It helps to pad their numbers. Nothing at all suspicious, though, right? Oh, and on that bit about a army of men with normal testosterone levels. When you break down the demographics and factors of voters, there is a category called the low propensity voter. Those are people that haven't voted before and are considered unlikely to vote in future elections. Well, young men make up most of the low propensity voters in our country. Well, one of the biggest upticks in early voting in precincts across the country is the turnout of low propensity voters, meaning young men. Information like that does not bode well for the commies, and their panic is showing and forcing them to lay the groundwork for the second biggest lie in human history. They are doing their IPB, prepping the battlefield. Now, what are some of the biggest indicators of this? Well, let's consider a few of the key battleground states, two of which are controlled by the commies, and the third is controlled by a CCP-loving globalist governor that assisted the commies in selling the big lie during the 2020 election. The two commie states are Michigan and Pennsylvania. A bit of interesting news from Pennsylvania from an unlikely source in a bit if I have time. And the CCP-loving governor, none other than Brian Kemp in Georgia. Those three states played the largest roles in the 2020 election that was stolen from President Trump. Yes, I said stolen, so ban me, fact checkers. Anyway, the secretaries of state for Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania recently appeared on various outlets of the Communist Party propaganda outlets to inform the nation that they won't have election results on election night, setting up a repeat of 2020. I find it incredulous that anyone with a functioning brain does not realize how ridiculous that statement is. Why is it that these states cannot count the votes in one night? Consider this. Florida, the third most populous state in the country, can count their votes in one day. Heck, they can have the results in one day despite many areas being impacted by a hurricane during a previous election cycle. And it isn't just total population size either, because we must consider the total number of votes cast in the election. For example, in the 2020 election, nearly 11 million Floridians cast their votes for president, and we knew the results that night. Now compare that to Pennsylvania during the 2020 election. We didn't know the results for weeks, despite there only being around 7 million votes for president cast during that election. Michigan and Georgia were even less, with around 5.5 and 5 million votes cast in those states, respectively. And the whole nation had to wait days and even weeks for those results. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Well, not only to figure out just how many votes were needed to give the tyrants their victory, but to concoct the narrative around the reasons for the delay in reporting the vote count. I have to apologize for the noises in the hallway. There's a bunch of young teenagers staying in the hotel. But anyway, then we have to couple these reports from communist tyrant governors and the useful lackey they have in Brian Kemp. We have to couple those reports with the obvious messaging and not so obvious messaging. The obvious messaging is that Donald Trump is Hitler, wants to control women's reproductive organs, wants to put Liz Cheney in front of a firing squad, that he's a sexual predator, a businessman that conducts or commits fraud. He led an insurrection on January 6th, or a serious risk to national security by selling secrets that he stole from the White House. All of those messages have been force-fed to the public for years now and followed up on the quid pro quo, Russian collusion, and PP tape hoaxes. We cannot forget that the opposing party also spied on his campaign. Spying on a campaign was an incident that ended the presidency of Richard Nixon. But since he was a Republican, he had to pay. But when the commies do it, well, that is accepted and acceptable behavior. But like I said, those are the obvious messages that the commies and their useful idiots in the media have been pushing for years now. What do you think is the not so obvious message? Well, I've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now, and that is the Christian vote. Put all of that together and you can see the pattern. Delay the counts in the battleground states to ensure that you get the results you want, and then blanket the compliant news media with the messaging that Donald Trump lost the election because the evangelicals could not support Trump in this election cycle because of his many flaws. Even though of the two candidates, the communist will be the worst for Christians in the country. And if they can't cheat enough, they will trot out the same old, well, he lost the popular vote messaging and deny him a mandate when he gets into office. It is so obvious, folks. So pay attention. And if you did not early vote, you must vote on election day. Even if there's a blizzard, get out there and vote. Even if you live in the bluest of blue states, you have to vote. We have to make this too big to rig. All right, I'm going to take a break right here and come back with my closing thoughts on burning some bridges too. Also God's word. So stick with me and I'll be right back. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Be prepared to push back against what is looking like the second biggest lie in human history being forced down our throats. And that is that Donald Trump lost this election. Because all normal indications at this date are pointing to a huge victory for President Trump. Of course, there were indicators of a Trump victory during the 2020 election, but the conditions for the steal were set up quite covertly. And most of America, we were none the wiser for it. We are, or should be, better prepared to push back against the lie this time. If the tyrants are successful in stealing this election, I fear for what happens next and pray that the commies don't want this country to tear itself apart because of their lust for power. I pray that they will take their defeat, regroup, and try again in 2028. But now, let's burn some bridges. Told you in the introduction that there are several people that I served within the Navy. And the ones I am referring to here are the ones that have allowed themselves to be programmed and pigeonholed into a special subgroup of citizens that the government created. These people that have succumbed to the woke mind virus, but they have a history of swearing an oath to the Constitution and have now forgotten what that oath means and what that document states, as well as the type of government it created. They don't understand that the smallest of minorities in mankind is the minority of the individual, and that our government was created to secure the liberty of the individual. They would rather see the government create new rights out of thin air for their special group. And those new rights, they erode the freedoms and liberty and rights of other individuals. As long as the government, which has the use of force, by the way, as long as the government ensures their man or government created rights are paramount over the God-given self-evident rights of other individuals, that is all that matters to them. They can't handle jokes. People that want children exposed to pornography in government schools do not care that it infringes upon the rights of parents. They want to control the content of educational material so they can preserve the innocence of their own children. Nope. Or people that want to kill babies in the womb and call it reproductive health care do not care one bit about the baby's right to life because they don't consider the baby a human. You know who else dehumanized other humans? Yeah, the Nazis and slave traders. Exactly what they're accusing President Trump of. Or the people that want new government created rights that force people to participate in their mental illness. Well, I see these people exactly for what they are now, or what they have become since serving in the military. They have become the tyrants our Constitution was created to protect the people from. I'm done being nice and trying to educate them on that wonderful document. I choose not to have anything to do with them any longer. I'm pretty sure that some of them that follow me on social media or watch this podcast are the very same people that report a lot of my content so they can try and get me banned or censored. They have become that which they swore an oath to fight against. So go ahead, keep reporting me. I won't be silenced. I will no longer remind you of your oaths. You can continue to sit comfortably in your support of tyranny until it comes for you and takes away your special rights in support of some newer category of government created rights. I'm done with you and no longer need to tolerate your toxic hatred of all that is good and pure and innocent in this country. Now, for God's word, which recounts the biggest lie ever told in human history and is eerily similar to what the communists and secular humanists are telling us all today. This week's wisdom from God's word comes to us from the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 4 and 5. You will not certainly die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That is the message from the left to the rest of America today. They believe they are gods, and they get to determine the rest of the country's morality and who gets to live and who doesn't. They get to determine who is an essential worker and who isn't. They get to determine who can worship and where they can worship. Now, they want to sell us all on the second biggest lie, that Donald Trump, not a perfect human, but who is, they want us to believe that despite all the evidence to the contrary, that Donald Trump right now will lose the election so they can continue their push towards total tyrannical rule and control of the richest country in the world and further fuel their control of this country and the world. Don't fall for the lie, folks. Stick to your guns. Push back on their narrative and don't let them be successful. Because if they are, our constitutional republic will not survive. Until next week, and hopefully a brighter future for our country, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.